'Cause one day I'll come to obliterate you. That'll prove once and for all that none are as worthy of the Spawn podcast as Hell's true citizens.
What's happening, Hellspawn? Welcome back to another episode of Spawnography with me, George Morrison, pronouns they, them, or she, her. With me, as always,
Spear sliding, pronouns they, them.
That's right.
That's the most voice that I've done for a voice, I think.
It was good voice. It was good
I
voice.
think it was pretty good.
It was good voice. It was good Violator voice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was Violator, everybody, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll get there. These issues that we're going to talk about tonight include some updates on some big Spawn villains, some returns of some old rogues and stuff. Before we get into it, Pierce, how's your week?
Pretty good. I just got back to New York from Boston. I was in Boston for
white trash, New York.
For a
I can say that because I'm from there.
For a work trip. I was in Boston for a couple days for a work trip, which is really fun. My company that I work for is totally remote, so we don't ever really see each other. We're just like us right now. We're just little boxes on Zoom, and that is sometimes, it's fine. I work from home, but at the same time, you don't get to know your coworkers, and that can be a little bit frustrating. I know that you have kind of the same thing going on, where you don't see your editors and stuff very often. So, if at all,
nope. It's interesting because I've met a lot of my former coworkers when we were doing a lot of reviews and stuff. But since that's right, like you, Pierce. But since I've been a long-term, full-time employee since 2015, I want to say, because it's been quite a long time now. It's been 15 years total since I've been writing for Newsarama. Anyway,
it's wild.
I know, right? In that time, I worked for 14 of those years for the same person. Never once met him. Didn't see him and didn't see his face until the 13th year. You met him once.
I did meet him once. We saw a movie together.
That's right. Interesting.
We won't invoke his name.
No, I met a couple. He's
nice
chilling.
Guy, sort of.
He's chilling, and that's cool. I did meet a few other coworkers, but yeah, now most of my coworkers are either in very different parts of the country or overseas in the UK, because the website is now owned by a UK company. At least at the time of this recording, Newsarama's parent site is one of the top sites in the world for video games.
Wish they'd let me write about video games again. I gotta pitch more video game stuff.
Yeah.
I covered Injustice. I thought I did it. Injustice.
You should. We'll talk about it off air. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, I get that. So I met some of your coworkers once. That was a fun time.
You did. You hung out at our last company
just
get
by
together.
chance, because I was in New York for a different event.
Yeah, they say hello.
Oh, cheers.
And also a funny, weird thing that has happened now at multiple get-togethers is that there's always one person who brings an outside person. So, you are a trendsetter in a way.
That's great. Yeah, good people. I'm glad you got to do that. Boston is lovely. I was born just outside of Boston, and I've returned there periodically throughout my life.
Lovely is that's a nice term for what it is. I don't love Boston. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And it is, but I did see my brother's old dorm building. He went to school in Boston, so that it's weird when you go to a city only to go to house parties, and then you go to when you're 22, and then you go to cities as an adult, and you're like, oh, the things that I know to do here, we're not allowed to do, and I don't know anybody that does them.
Yeah, so, we're not going to go hit up a dorm party tonight. We're not that into pop punk.
Yeah, not anymore anyway. But yeah, other than that, it was nice. It was nice to see everybody, and it was nice to connect with my with the folks that I work with, and also the restaurants we work with. I work in the restaurant industry, so connecting with some of those folks was really nice putting names to emails, which is, I think, a thing that you and I both kind of deal with
the comic
journalism
industry,
with comic industry stuff, where you're like, oh, I've read your books, but I've never spoken to you, and then you get to talk to somebody and you're like, oh, okay, great, cool.
That's true. Well, you know what we should do now is check in with our buddy Al Simmons and the people and creatures in his world. I think we're just coming off of Blood Feud, which was a pretty cool story.
Yeah, Blood Feud is coming after the introduction of the new Spawn costume, and then Alan Moore and Tony Daniel. They have it's the 6 pages at the end of 32, where we are introduced to a mysterious new blonde character who we don't really know too much about. We covered this in the previous episode, but then we get a lot more lore wrangling, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, learned a lot about Spawn's costume, added a new rogue to the Rogues Gallery, which we'll check in with on a larger scale in some of these issues here. But it was pretty cool. Blood Feud. Go back and listen to that.
Yeah, and so like I said, or like you said, rather, excuse me, we're going to get into it. We're covering Spawn number 33 and 34 today. We're going to start with number 34. Oh my God. We're going to start with number 33, Shadows, Part 1. Story by Todd McFarlane. Art by Greg Capullo, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters by Tom Orzechowski. Color by Steve Oliff and Ollie Optics. Ollie Optics is Tracy Anderson, Breck Blackford, Kathy Ennis, Patty Stratton Jordan, Jennifer McFadden, Marie St. Clair, Quinn Suplee, Christ Wolf, Natus, and Michael Jeremiah. Special thanks to Chance Wolf and Julia Simmons. Julia Simmons is the graphics coordinator, director of creative development. Terry Fitzgerald, dedicated to Gene Colan. We love Gene Colan.
Hey, and that's after the Tom Palmer dedication a little while back, who was, of course, Gene Colan's inker.
Longtime inker. So, very cool. Again,
love Gene Colan.
Gene Colan, one of the greats. And I mean, Tomb of Dracula, really being an all-timer, and Daredevil, obviously. So,
Tomb of Dracula, very interesting. I mean, I think what's cool about this is there's a little more horror coming into this again. Todd's kind of leaning away from some of the supernatural stuff, but back into some of the horror elements, with Spawn almost as a movie monster in these issues. And then, of course, that's coming off of Blood Feud, which invoked some actual movie monster tropes. So I like that we're getting back into those horror vibes for Spawn.
Yeah, it feels like it's getting closer. It's getting closer to what Todd was envisioning for the character. He talks in the letters columns of Blood Feud about how he was never really interested in the supernatural stuff. He wasn't interested in a Doctor Strange comic. He was trying to make a more street level hero. Blood Feud is almost, the intro to Batman Year One, where they're like, what is he? Is he a monster or whatever? And it sort of lands on he's some sort of vampire, some sort of extra normal hazard. This sort of continues that in the same way, that kind of vibe. Like
right.
That's the new normal for Spawn now at this point. He's not a young blood. He's like an extra normal hazard.
Yeah.
We're seeing a few things
I like
here,
that
which
term.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We're seeing a couple things here that are really cool, which are probably necessary, right? Todd is pulling himself a little bit away from the Image shared universe stuff. He doesn't want to keep calling Spawn a young blood. Right. We're going to see another angel with a name that will come up again at a later date.
Yes.
That will maybe be a replacement for Angela in some way. So we're seeing the character move away from some of the things that have been established in the Image universe as a whole, because I think as time has gone on, Image is not so much a shared universe, or not as much of a shared universe as they might have thought it was going to be at the time that it was created.
And I think Todd is also maybe a little reluctant to keep adding other people's shit into his comic at this point, because by now he's starting to navigate some of those contracts and other things that are involved with toys and Hollywood and other businesses and stuff like that. So I think he's maybe a little reluctant to be like, yeah, Shadowhawk, we'll talk about him, bring in the Savage Dragon, whatever. I think he is understanding a little more why Spawn is best on his own in some cases, and why that kind of siloed version of the Image universe is going to be honestly probably the reason Spawn survives longer than any other Image property, like in a single go.
Yeah, 100%. I think that he is recognizing, and this is especially the speed with which Spawn comes out comparative to other Image books. We've talked about it previously. Like, he's on issue 8 by the time other books are on issue 3. He's now on issue 33, and there's no book getting close to that at this point. And new books are just starting around the same time. Wetworks is really kind of finding its legs. Wildstorm books are kind of starting to become a thing, even though they were kind of a thing before, but the name Wildstorm hadn't been fully formed yet. So
right.
There's a lot really going on behind the scenes, and I think that Todd's a team player, right? He's never going to throw his boys under the bus in that way, but he is going to, similar to what we saw with the Houdini arc and the Batman Spawn crossover, where he's like, I think that this needs to exist just so that I can fall back on a reason for the shoelace face that's not something in a crossover that I might never ever get to reprint, which it's not in the compendiums, it's not in the origins, it's hard to reprint. So if you
just read through,
you're fine.
And you don't pick up Spawn Batman, you can, and that's true. And okay, I'm not usually the one who brings up the letters columns at all, but there was a point in the Blood Feud letter columns also where he talks about we may have discussed this in the episode even, where he talks about bringing Greg Capullo in because it helps him release 12 issues of Spawn a year instead of 8. And he owes it to the fans to make Spawn something that I think, in his words, he says is more about the character than about him. Now, I think that attitude is also part of why he starts to separate himself from the rest of Image Comics. I want to say I do like that extra normal hazard term. I think that's something that almost could have had a life of its own in a way. And maybe it will as this goes on more, but it also it feels like one of those things that like is aching for like extra normal hazard hunters or something like that as like a spin-off or something,
George, that's just our hardcore band.
I know. or is it the first EP from K7 Letha? We'll talk about that later. And I think didn't Wetworks have like vampires and werewolves and stuff in it? So
what's kind of interesting is that all of the books sort of have this like supernatural thing because they're like, what is everybody going to fight? I do think a big part of it is that Spawn's already there. Spawn's already created this like baseline. At the same time, you've got The Crow coming out. You've got like as a movie. You've got The Crow is a Spawn, obviously.
Right, of course.
He loves his girlfriend. There is this sort of like...
They do The Crow Spawn. They should. That'd be sick.
It would be really good. It'd be really good. Todd, call us. But we have Interview with a Vampire. We're gonna have. We're gonna have a Blade a couple years later. We're going to have we do have this like bubbling sort of supernatural obsession.
There's a horror renaissance of the '90s going on at this time. I was gonna say though, what movie was it that they watched at like the Image house that they were all like, we gotta put vampires in this shit. We gotta have a werewolf in this shit.
It's Lost Boys.
Lost Boys.
It's Lost Boys. It has to be Lost Boys.
If it was, I don't know if they would be so straight because Lost Boys made me gay.
Yeah. Lost Boys is extremally gay, and so is every comic book in the 90s.
That's true.
But but what it is
similar ways.
Are
it's
gay
that
comics.
Vibe.
They're gay comics made by straight men. Like that's what they are. They're just like they're using all of
I mean, that's the X-Men.
they're using all the visuals. Chris Claremont's not straight.
Well, in the 90s, though.
Oh, he got straight in the 90s?
No,
Yeah,
I meant he wasn't writing through the mid 90s at this point.
I know, I'm kidding. But yes, you're correct. Yeah, in the mid to late 90s, once Chris leaves.
Like Scott Lobdell is as straight as it gets.
That's true.
I think he is openly straight. Like,
which brave, honestly, if you're working on the X-Men. But yeah, no, like I do think that, I mean, there's just a bunch of shit from the 80s that like is gay. Like you can love Judas Priest.
Hell yeah, you can. I do.
But you can not understand what's going on.
What they're actually singing about. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do think that there's like a little bit of whiplash, and I all right, we're gonna go on like a slight tangent even before we get into the episodes. I do think there's something inherently homoerotic about superhero comics.
Well, yeah,
because if you're straight, they are a power fantasy. If you're not straight, they are aspirational and confusing.
Yes,
and that is, like I said, confusing to say the least. But Batman on his face, the reason that Batgirl had to get introduced
was because of the seduction of the innocent shit.
Yeah, to make him seem less gay. It didn't
Have
work.
we talked about Batgirl? If you're going to do your tangent about the Batmans, I'm just going to tell this quick story about Batgirl. When I was a little kid outside of Boston, speaking of Boston, I loved Batman 66 growing up. This is just about Batman and superheroes making you gay. I loved Batman 66 growing up. My dad watched it with me because he watched it when it was on TV the first time. And he took me into Boston to this event from WGBH Boston, which is a public broadcasting station. If you are alive in Boston in the 80s, you were already hearing the sound of the WGBH logo. He took me to this event that was the Dancing Batgirls, and it was a bunch of young women in the Yvonne Craig Batgirl costume doing synchronized dances to Bat Dance because it was 1989. It was the summer that the Batman movie came out, and that was like a formative event in my mind. I loved that because I loved Batgirl so much. Then a few years later, I went to Tennessee, to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, on a vacation with my mom and stuff and my sister, and we went to the Ripley's Believe It or Not car museum because we were just looking for something to do. Unbeknownst to me, they had not only the original Batmobile and Batcycle in there, they also had Yvonne Craig signing autographs, and there was no one in there because it was raining. We had gone in there because of the rain, and I sat there and talked to her for like 15, 20 minutes because she was so impressed that I knew who she was, and I was, of course, starstruck. So anyway, that's another superheroes, they make you gay. Batgirl.
Great. Yeah, I mean, they all do in some way.
That's right.
You can be straight and like superheroes, but it's rare.
And you know what? If you like superheroes and you're questioning, just hit us up.
Yeah, let us know. Let us know what's got you on the fence. To all our straight listeners, I'm sorry for this tangent, but I'm not really.
Cut this all for time, then put it back in 3 times.
You're doing that now because you know that I'll do it.
Don't do it. don't put a 5-minute tangent about nothing.
I might cut it all together. So,
we'll find out.
Depending on how long this episode goes.
We'll see. So getting into Spawn 33, which we read the credits for 45 minutes ago.
Yeah, so here's what I'm going to say. I really do think, and we've talked about this before, I think Todd's getting better.
He is.
I'm having a much smoother time reading these books, and he is getting better at recapping himself. He's getting better at moving through the plot. He's not great at reminding other writers what the vibe is, because he has to go out of his way to explain shit
Right.
That happened like in Blood Feud. Like we get those homeless guys, the unhoused, that are sort of, they're not the night people we're used to, and they're very angry at Spawn, and they set him on fire. And so like he has to spend a page like writing around that.
Right.
It's not
saying
great.
Those aren't our friends, etc. But we're also in the era of Spawn where we're now opening on a kind of a montage page rather than a opening on a kind of a catch up like montage page rather than on a splash page, which for the first chunk of Spawn, we almost always had a splash page to open. We've slowly moved into, and now in the Greg Capullo era, it's a stylistic choice. It's different. This one works for me. This is Clown here, right?
Yes, it is.
That's right. I didn't think it was Freak yet, who does come up in these issues.
Oh no, actually, I do think it is Freak.
Is this the Freak?
In the first 2 pages? I do think it is Freak because he's super fucking weird. He does have like a similar vibe, but we haven't met him yet. Spoiler alert: there's a character named the Freak. He shows up in another Alan Moore issue, specifically issue 37. So we'll meet him in a few. He does show up here technically, but we don't see his face.
Right. But he has a cameo through these few issues. He has that big mouthful of teeth in his like non-reveal panel where you see him like sewing the doll from little bits of like Spawn's costume or something that have gone down the drain that he's collected.
Yeah, so we get these kind of like huge these really like long panels. We're getting a lot of narration. We're seeing these fingers and fingernails that are broken in a way that like
it's like
you'd never break your fingernails, but if you did, it would be horrifying.
It's like Raphael's eyelids from a couple issues ago, where they're all just weird, jagged, very almost impressionist shapes. And it's very similar to that. It's a Greg Capullo style thing. And it works here because it makes you go, gross.
Yeah. And, you know, as we turn the page, we get to see he's talking about tearing Spawn tearing Spawn like limb from limb.
Waiting in the shadows to strike for the right moment. Basically laying out that he has plans within plans that are going to be long-term efforts to take down Spawn for a reason we haven't learned yet, whatever his motivations.
I do love the little transition on page 3. Eventually the sick laughter fades the next evening. Like
it's a very Castlevania-esque transition.
Need it. We don't really need it. It's still fun, and that's where this is where Al has to sort of hold court a little bit.
Yeah,
the night people that are his friends are still like on his side, but they're like, hey man, like the hierarchy of power is about to change in the Spawniverse, and we need to talk about it.
I love this page of Spawn holding court though with all the night people around him. The coloring on this page is really effective, and Spawn's cape is now fuller again, though it's still full of holes. It's not quite the ragged shreds that it was before. This is Spawn in his element, and it's also an elemental kind of Spawn splash page where you've got one of the night people framing the foreground with his bottle, and then you've got the kind of I really like this caricature of the guy over on the far right, who I think is the spy, right?
He is, yeah.
Yeah,
which
who's
I like that he's kind of so weird looking that you can't not notice him.
Mm-hmm.
He almost looks like of a spy.
Dopey. Yeah. He's so bug-eyed. He looks like he's shocked at Spawn's presence. And Spawn is basically telling them, like, look, if I stay in this alley with you, you're going to be subject to forces that are trying to do harm to me and by extension to you because you're in the vicinity. And they're like, we already told you, those weren't our friends that tried to kill you. That's what Pierce was saying a minute ago about we saw some different night people in Blood Feud. And Spawn says, I found another place I can go that might be safer. And Bobby kind of calls him on it. He's like, no, look, that's a load of crap. You're staying here with us. You didn't start the trouble. What we go through has been this way for a long time. The psychos, crime, and violence, none of that's going to change. We'll still get beat up, shot at, and mugged by the bad guys. Hell, even the good guys pick on us. So forget the nursemaid crap. we'll survive. We always have.
I really love the top panel on that page. I love the "What's your problem, Bobby? You."
Yeah.
What? That has been my Twitter banner for years since I read it, because I think I think it looks really cool.
It is a great Spawn face.
But I also
little flies.
I also love that the Night People really feel like they're on the same level as Spawn. Like they don't consider themselves less than just because they don't have superpowers, and they don't consider him more than just because he has a big cape and superpowers.
No, at the end of the day, they all live in the alley.
Right. And to them, they're like, brother, you're just dealing with the shit that we deal with.
Yeah.
Like we get picked on, you get picked on. It's maybe the power level's a little different, but it's basically the same.
Exactly. And he says, so if you want to run away, go ahead and go to wherever this place you have now is, but don't pin that on us and say that it's because you're bringing danger to us. Say it, do it because that's what you want to do.
I do like this as another characterization of Al trying to think about other people, right? We keep getting Al's a good guy, and he specifically does not understand their world, right? He's never been homeless before. He doesn't know what this is like. He was a world famous government assassin, and
he slept in a big bed with his wife, not a race car bed. And so that is a good point. And also, not for nothing, he's from hell, and his motivations are ultimately hellish in a lot of ways. He has some very demonic instincts that we'll pick up on in the second half of this little two-parter. But that is part of it too, is that he's trying to fight those instincts and find a way to fight the ones that cause him to do harm. And in some ways they're leading him to do harm by neglect. And so exactly. Here he's trying to say, if I can't do anything right, I'm going to go. But they're like, no, it's not because of us. Don't blame us. And I also like this page of Spawn with all the rogues so far. You've got Overt Kill. You've got Tremor. You've got Chapel. You've got Redeemer and Curse. Yes, of course. And Tony Twist / Dracula, Vito Dracula Gravano. And at the bottom right, Jason Wynn, who's going to become important throughout this two-parter as well.
I do like that page a lot. One of the big things that Todd has talked about with the revamp of the costume was, well, he lives in an alley. I should make the cape look like he lives in an alley. And so I like that the cape is big again, but it's not as spindly as it was, but it is still got holes in it, and he lives in an alley more than it is full and
right. It's not stringy, but it looks all. It's not stringy, but it looks all kind of rotted out and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, I like this. He's like, it's been a friggin' sea of freaks. Little foreshadowing. Cops, monsters, hitmen, you name it. And honestly, there are a lot of Mafia cyborg experiments here.
Yeah, that's true.
But what really happens next with Bobby and Spawn is interesting, because Spawn is kind of talking about, how all these problems have become Bobby's problems too. And Bobby's like, well, then do something about it. Remember, Chapel killed me too, which was in Youngblood, which I forgot about. I didn't remember that.
We chatted about it real quick.
That's
because,
right.
In the arc where we meet Fred, it kind of opens with Bobby being brought back to life.
That's right.
Right.
You're
so
right. I had forgotten that.
Back. So one thing I like about this is it is kind of Bobby calling out that the book has moved really slowly. And I know we had a listener who was worried that we kept calling out the fact that it moves very slowly.
Well, I mean, that
we're
just
aware,
gives us...
We're aware, but...
Yeah, sometimes we do too.
It can be a complaint. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But so Bobby is like, do something about it. Chapel killed me and he killed you too, but someone told him to pull the trigger. There's your target. Find the bugger who stole your identity, which, not a great word. And your life, everything you loved, including your wife.
Is that bad? Is bugger bad? Should I
That,
not have said that?
I mean, it's fine to say it. It's, I guess.
I thought it was.
It's more of British slang.
Oh, now I'm getting what it's probably slang for. Wait, is it?
I think.
For what I think it is?
I think so.
Oh, I thought it was just like a...
Maybe not.
No, I think it's because they say like bugger off.
Yeah, well, that's like... I think buggering is like...
I'm going to look this up now.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Bugger, a person who penetrates the anus of someone during sexual intercourse.
Oh, well, you know what? It's not as bad as I thought.
But it's still meant to be demeaning.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway.
Now I think we should take it back.
We should take it back. I'm sure British people are taking it back. It's more of a British word. Anyway.
All right. Anyway.
The implication here, though, that kind of shakes Spawn for a minute, that is interesting. Boy, we've had a lot of digressions in this episode already.
I know.
You're going to have a good time editing this shit.
Listeners, we are 2 hours in.
I almost lost it for a second. I was almost like, how? I didn't do any dabs or anything.
That's right, but we're 3 hours in.
Well, 5 hours in. But the important thing here that kind of takes Spawn off guard, and we got to start moving a little faster after this, is Bobby is like, find the person who took everything from you, including your wife. And if you know Spawn, you know that your wife is a big trigger word for him. But the implication that Spawn suddenly thinks of is, did Terry Fitzgerald steal my life instead of just inheriting it? Did my wife's new husband, is he somehow responsible for Chapel taking my life? And that's not going to be explored too much here, but that is something that seems to take Spawn off guard.
I think that it doesn't really work at first because we know that's not the case. The thing we've talked about a few times is knowing things before a character does are only fun if you only know them right before the character does. Where you go, oh my God. And then they figure out on the next page. And then you're like, yes, okay, cool. We're on the same page. Similarly, it's not that much fun when they know way more than you. And then they do I thought about that 13 seconds ago. Unless it's extremely dramatic. Because there's no tension then if they already know and you don't know.
Well, I think this is meant to build tension between Spawn and Terry, because the other part of this sort of subplot, in addition to Spawn sort of reclaiming the alley and running back into an old nemesis in the Violator, the other big part of this is Terry moving into the offices of Jason Wynn and working alongside him. So I think it's meant to start building tension between Spawn and that situation, because also, as evolved as Spawn has been about the idea of like, well, if anybody could take care of my wife, it was my best friend. There is a point where it is kind of natural that when someone goes like, figure out who took your fucking wife, that's who took your fucking life, for Spawn to go, wait a minute, Terry really did take my wife somehow. Would take my wife, please. Which that's all very, obviously that is all very diminutive towards Wanda, because she's not an object to be taken. Al Simmons doesn't think of her that way in ways we've seen him discuss her before. His attitude towards her has been ultimately very feminist, very 90s.
But we do know that he hit her once.
That's true. We also saw that.
It's complicated with Wanda, honestly.
That's another thing that we just recently learned, that's true. That was a few issues ago at this point. It was just that one panel reveal that at some point he hit Wanda. And I think it's all kind of just little moments of trying to build tension. This one with Spawn's gritted teeth, like I love that panel actually with the shoelace.
A+ panel. The shoelace adds so much to the character in a weird way.
Well,
you wouldn't think that it would just take stitching a guy's face up to do that.
We're also seeing him without the mask on more here, which I think is maybe because of some of the events of Blood Feud, he's not wearing it as much. But yeah, I think it makes face more interesting when he's not wearing the mask, because he of course doesn't have many features. He has eyes, a mouth, and then burned up, scarred up flesh.
No ears here. So
yeah. Very rarely
he's
are
lost
depicted
the
with
ears
ears.
again.
They're gone again. They've retreated. So I think that's interesting. It's not really going to get followed up on too much, though we will catch up with Terry again soon. I do like this little sequence here with Sam and Twitch, where Twitch is in the hospital because of blood feud. Again, go back and listen to that episode. Go back to that episode. Sound like fucking Lorne Michaels. But
if you didn't listen to that episode, he got fucked up and stuffed into a locker by Sansker, and
almost died.
Or Twitch does, and Sam finds him. He does not die, but he does get folded up, to put it nicely.
Mildly. Yeah. It's pretty horrific. And now he's in the hospital recovering with a bevy of buxom nurses. Todd and Greg, I don't know what it is, if it's them feeding into each other, but in these issues in particular, you can tell they were like, let's draw some hot chicks. Because once again, there are very few women in Spawn. I like that we're getting more of the angels coming in now, because there are very few women depicted in Spawn as more than objects. Even Wanda has a hard time transcending being a plot device and an object, even when she's getting, even when Al Simmons is paying her this respect and having these sort of, I used the word evolved earlier, but that's it's kind of a very 90s hip word for it.
Well, and also we've already abandoned the fact that she was helping out Terry with his work. As soon as he decides that he's going to go work for Jason Wynn, she's just...
Well, now she's working for the children's organization or something, the children's charity or something, which again, it's like, I know one thing about my wife, and her job is nurse.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of nurses, hello nurse, because Twitch is getting really fawned over by these three beautiful women. They all love Twitch. All beautiful women love Twitch, including me. And part of it is that he kind of does look like a Big Johnson cartoon. Like when you see him out walking around.
Yeah.
Like he's got that kind of nerd vibe where he carries a big gun, and like we're starting to see here that that's a funny metaphor to Todd, I think.
Todd's like very into just the almost like slapstick nature of Sam and Twitch.
Yeah.
And it's like slapstick's maybe not even the word.
Well, I mean, it kind of is. It's very shticky. Like,
yeah, but it is. If comedy is just, if jokes are just being told sort of the opposite of what you expect in any given situation, then like this is the base level version, right?
It's
like,
vaudevillian in the idea that like...
Thank you. That is exactly the word I was looking for. It's extremely like big, but very simple. And,
right.
But it works.
I love this drawing of Twitch's face where he's all bandaged up with his glasses taped to his face and his like big smile and his weird
missing teeth.
You want to call that a Stan Lee mustache almost, but it's more like it's a Charlie Chaplin, we'll call it conservatively.
Sure. That's definitely what people are thinking of first when they see that mustache.
But that push broom mustache. J. Jonah Jameson is what I meant.
Michael Jordan
had that mustache.
That's what I was thinking.
Not Stan Lee. Stan Lee had a big push broom. J. Jonah Jameson.
Right.
Who is Steve Ditko's caricature of Stan Lee.
Like I said, Michael Jordan.
Yeah. Most famous person to ever wear that mustache.
He's in the hospital. There are some hot nurses.
Sam's very impressed by this. He insults the kind of nurses he gets with a little body shaming, says they're hairy bulldogs. And Twitch just says it's just a coincidence. I like that they kind of have a touching moment here where we're seeing them bond as partners over the course of the series so far. We're getting precious little Sam and Twitch. I honestly always wish there was maybe 2 or 3 more pages of them. I'll be happy when they get their own spinoff.
You want to cover that? We could cover that.
Could, or just read it for fun or whatever,
I think we should cover
where it intersects. Yeah. We'll see how it goes. But I mean, I do love Sam and Twitch, and that's what I'm saying is that we've seen them over the course of 30 issues now go from being kind of grudging partners at the sort of the start of like, really bonding. And now Sam is showing up in the hospital with Twitch saying like, I'm going to put everything I've been doing on the back burner and try and get to the bottom of the Spawn shit because that's what got you in the hospital.
The thing that I think doesn't work about that though is that they do seem like grudging partners at the beginning, and now they are not, and then we find out that they've been partners for 9 years. So
that's fair.
It does feel like there wasn't a plan for those characters totally, or we didn't exactly know what Todd and his brain trust kind of didn't understand what their dynamic was going to be. Oh, are they, because they are kind of opposites, right? Like, oh, big fat guy and skinny little guy. Are they going to be like butting heads the entire time, or are they actually going to be really close friends? I think that they do sort of become friends pretty quickly. And so I don't know. There's like it feels like the plan changed at some point. That's all I'm going to say. It's fun to see like the characterization change. I think to this point, for a non-powered character, like I love Spawn. Obviously, Spawn's my favorite character. Twitch is my favorite character.
Right.
Like all the way. I think everything about him is really funny.
He slings that thing. Everything's...
Well, we're going to find out that he really does.
He does. That is not easy.
We already know that he does, but we're going to find out that he really does.
Page at the bottom here, we see his like 7 kids come in, and they all look like, you can tell that they're all mashups of Twitch and whoever his unseen so far wife is. I like the kid in the middle, the presumably oldest kid, who definitely looks like he sells hash brownies.
I knew a lot of that kid at New Paltz.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I went to college.
That makes perfect sense. So they come in and they're happy to see him. One of them says, "Cool, Dad, you look like Frankenstein." And the other one says, "Mom's been crying lots, but I've been a big girl." And
they're fun. I like them.
But before they come in, the resolution to Sam saying that he's going to give up everything to find Spawn to figure out what happened to Twitch. Twitch says, "Don't do that. Wait. Go get Chief Banks, because if he's connected to this Billy Kincaid shit, you've got to take him down."
Mm-hmm. I like that we're following up on that plot line.
Yeah.
It's going to play into this a bit.
It is.
This is another thing that I mean about it feeling like Todd is figuring things out in terms of pacing and in terms of like how to move plot forward, where we don't need to give individual pages to things necessarily. We can be reminded that things are all kind of tied together, and that you can leave a scene with a character like running off, and then similar to our next scene, find out where that character is going after a little check-in that doesn't just follow up on the last thing that we saw that character doing, which is Twitch and the ambulance. Right. In Blood Feud, it is also like, and we're going to keep going and going and going.
Right. It moves the whole story forward by following up. Now, I want to cut back to when we first started talking about this, and we were questioning whether that was Clown or the Freak. I think that was Clown, because we get back to him here, and we can see his belly in the shadows there now. We can see the kind of blue makeup and his hair in this bottom panel. And he's got the big googly-eyed guy from Spawn's alley telling him that Spawn is acting like he's going to leave the alley. And the guy says, "Okay, well, whatever. Get lost, but come back in a few days because I need help setting a trap for our friend."
You know what? You're totally right. I think just because I'd read ahead, I assumed it was Freak.
Well, Freak also shows up in the shadows, much like this later, to help Violator. Yeah, and I mean, I questioned it a little bit too. It's
the thing is that the voodoo doll doesn't feel Violator to me.
Right, but we can see it floating in the water there in front of him.
Yeah,
in that big middle panel.
I didn't even notice it that time. I didn't even notice it. I'll be honest.
Yeah. So, that's why we do a bigger, deeper read on some of these.
That's why we do a podcast about Spawn.
So that 4.5 hours in, we can notice that we weren't right about the intro.
Yeah, wow. We've been podcasting for 6 hours.
It's been 8.5 hours.
I do like how insane this man looks. He looks like a mole.
He does look very mole man. He almost looks like Dopey the dwarf. He's got that. His hair is that big scraggly shock of red. This is some like prime Greg Capullo cartooning.
Yeah, it's good stuff. We're gonna move on to the Lesbian Angel Tower.
Lesbian Angel Tower is also the name of my new band.
Great.
Yeah, we check in with Raphael and with none other than Tiffany, who we see here in glasses looking pretty demure in a suit. But that's going to be one of those like librarian transformations.
Like real, like Can't Buy Me Love.
Yeah, like exactly like She's All That kind of deal.
Yeah.
Anyway, you know what we're saying.
One day.
She's going to get her hair all teased out, start dressing like Nikki Sixx.
This is also where I was just complimenting Todd on like, don't do like a random page check-in that doesn't lead to anything. No, in this, he's just like, here's a random page of this.
Yeah.
It's not going to come up
with
again.
The Angels. No. But I mean, it has been a few issues if you count Blood Feud.
In fairness, it could happen though at any time. It doesn't need to happen here. And also actually doesn't need to happen ever, because all you need is one panel that tells me that it got fixed. This is something that I think that movies end up doing a little bit better than comics. When you're bad at writing comics, you think that you need to show things to make sure that they happen. And movies are just like, hey, a character said that a thing happened. So it did.
This is a good scene to contrast with that Sam and Twitch scene, because they had 2 pages, of course, but that was a brief check-in scene that, as you pointed out, followed up on the last time we saw them, which was Twitch getting stuffed in an ambulance in Blood Feud, and got us to the next point in their story, which is we know what's going to happen next for them. Here, the Angels don't get any of that, like, further step forward. We're just checking in with them and finding out that they've rebuilt the tower.
But if we're not moving forward, then there's no point in checking in. That's kind of my point.
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, that's what I'm saying, is it's a contrast in the effectiveness of the Sam and Twitch sequence versus the kind of, this is just a page of, not even a very interesting page of these Angels.
Yeah, it's not very good.
Speaking of which, we get another 1-page check-in with Jason Wynn. This one's a little more useful because rather than just showing the tower being rebuilt, this is the page where we learn that Jason Wynn now has Terry Fitzgerald coming to work for him. And he has resolved to let the transfer go through because he wants to get a closer eye on Terry because of these files. As we've talked about so many times, files are the currency in the world of Spawn. There's files being traded everywhere. Not only did Sam and Twitch have files about the chief, but Terry has files linking Jason Wynn to God knows what. And so they're about to engage in this game of cat and mouse within Jason Wynn's office, where they're sort of trying to investigate and intimidate the other into giving up some sort of information.
Yeah, I do think that some of the intrigue between these characters, like what do you know, what do you not know, how close do I have to keep my friends and enemies, I think that kind of intrigue does work really well in terms of these sort of issue to issue sort of like issue to issue conflicts. So I'm happy to see it here. It's the least fucking interesting thing in the whole book, though.
It is, and the files are starting to get a little exhausting. You want it to move a little further. I think more interesting is, kind of the idea of them being in the same office together and these like tete-a-tetes that they're having. It doesn't get enough room to breathe to really be interesting because it feels very perfunctory, but it does also feel like if they spent too much time on it, what are we really doing here with the files? Are we doing Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spawn?
Maybe we should do Tinker Tailor Soldier Spawn. In a way, are we not doing Tinker Tailor Soldier Spawn?
That's what I'm saying. And that's kind of the vibe, is the opposite of Spawn. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is people having hushed conversations. Spawn is people yelling, "What did you call me?" As we see on the next page, where we catch back in with Spawn in his alley, and we see the googly eye guy going, Al Simmons?
That is his voice. Yeah, I mean, I will give Todd a little bit of credit here, where this is another issue where if it was your first ever issue of Spawn, if somehow for 3 years you just were ignoring this book and this is the first one you picked up, you're not in a terrible spot.
No, you're not. And I mean, he's peppering in stuff more than just giving us a page with slabs of text, which I think is better. I think the text to art ratio is getting a lot more fluid, a lot better balance than some of those. There are some of those middle issues where it's like there's just walls of text on the page, which is interesting because it seems there's a disconnect between Todd's writing and his art in that era. Whereas now he's writing for someone else, so he's got to be more concise in his actual writing about what's going to be on the page, instead of drawing whatever he wants and then making it make sense in the captions.
What's weird is not even has to be more concise in his writing. It's just that he has to have a vision for what, and maybe he had this in those issues where we're kind of lambasting, oh, it's another splash page with fucking 80,000 words. Maybe he had a plan for it, but he ran out of time. He says himself, if I was doing it all myself, I would do 8 issues a year, maybe.
Right.
And now that I have Greg, I can do 12. I can do 13. You know,
and also so, he's learning. You know, he's been writing this now for a while. We're nearly 3 years worth of issues in, which means it's been almost 3.5, 4 years of time. And that's not counting even the years that he was doing Spider-Man. So he's been a writer now for a while. And I think there is something that comes from writing for another artist rather than just for yourself, where you have to sort of give the reins over to someone to interpret a vision that you have to create in text.
Yeah. And again, we don't really know how the dialogue passes went on this. Like, there's a chance that it was done a little bit of Marvel style where it's like, here's the script. Oh, I got the art. Now I'm going to do a whole new kind of pass in the dialogue and captions. I will ask that question when we can, I guess.
Yeah.
When we can ask that question, we will. But I really like this little sequence. I love the cape. I love the coloring on the cape. I love how the cape takes over the page.
I love the cartooning of their faces. The page where Spawn is grabbing the guy. The guy calls him Al Simmons. Spawn's like, "What did you call me?" And I'm guessing that he's shocked that someone called him Simmons, because everybody calls him Al. Like, the night people aren't calling him Spawn. They call him Al.
Right.
But they don't know his last name, I guess. This guy does. I love the way their faces, like, get closer. The storytelling from, the bottom panel of that first page where we see through Spawn's eyes in the top panel, that's cool. I love that. We see that green haze that's over everything. Spawn choking the guy at the bottom where he's like, "What did you call me?" Love that page. The art there is so good. The next page, the whole first sequence, is so good too, where you see their teeth up against each other. You see Spawn's gritted teeth. You see this guy's big buck teeth. He almost has just such an almost inhuman looking face with that weird cleft lip.
I love the third panel where his little eyes are just hiding underneath
peeking
Spawn.
Out from under Spawn's cape, where Spawn has basically got him like engulfed in the cape. Spawn says, "How do you know who I am?" The guy says, "Some stranger wanted me to find you. I'm supposed to tell you 3 things. Al Simmons, Jason Wynn, and then something about Wanda, and that he wants to meet you." Spawn says, "Why me?" He says, he didn't say, "I'm just a messenger." And then Spawn expels him from his cape where he's engulfed. That whole sequence of him engulfing him in the cape and then throwing him out is so good. And he says, "Tell your stranger he knows where he can come find me."
So, do you think we talked about Todd saying, "Oh, if you want to get really good at drawing something, you got to draw it 1,000 times, or thousands of times rather."
Mm-hmm.
You think that Greg said to Todd, like, "Pretty bad at drawing teeth. Want to get better at drawing teeth?" Because there's teeth like all over this shit.
Well, I think we've seen that throughout Spawn, though. That's a motif for when we see it's a motif for Spawn. That we see Spawn in the shadows with his gritted teeth. That we see Spawn in the shadows with his gritted teeth.
But Greg does it differently than Todd.
He does.
There's a lot more detail in the teeth that he draws. That first panel, the "How do you know who I am" panel, is way different than Todd would do it. So.
But it's also in the same way not that different because let's zoom in on that for 30 seconds here. The way Spawn's face is depicted, he's still set back in shadow where most of his face is hidden. You can only see kind of just the top. His face here forms a whole skull shape with the parts you can see. Like it's got that big top, his cheeks are kind of poking out, and then you can just see his teeth to define the jaw. So he's got a very skull-like face there. A Todd McFarlane penciled version of that would be a lot more abstract. His jaw would probably be in a weird spot. Like it wouldn't quite line up how you expect. But it's still the same principle of hiding him kind of in shadow.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he even really lays out the page the same way. Like, I don't think Todd pencils the whole page the same way. So I don't think that we get that kind of weird close-up where we also see those buck teeth of this guy too.
Right, and I like that. We do get whenever we see Spawn's teeth gritting, his bottom lip and his teeth kind of how he has that underbite, which we also see in the mask plenty of times. Anyway, Spawn throws the guy out of the cape, tells him, "Go back to your boss," and then kind of surreptitiously follows him. I love this big splash panel of Spawn against the moon. One big boot against the moon.
Kind of one of the best pages of the whole 2 issues that we're going to cover.
I really enjoy it.
Fucking rules.
It. But we learn that this is I also like the cape on the little inset panels there. I like Spawn's cape on the next page kind of creeping into the panel. And what we learn is that this is really a game of kind of cat and mouse between Spawn and this stranger who is the Violator / clown, as is foretold on the cover of the issue. And this little poor dopey guy who looks like the evil basement twin of Twitch or something almost.
He looks like if a mole was turned into a person.
Yeah, he sure does. So Ratatouille here goes back to his master and he's like, "Great, I think he's following me like you wanted. What next?" And I love the panel of the close-up on his big dopey eyes as the fear enters his face. And then we get a good old-fashioned Violator heart ripping as the Violator's arm tears out his heart.
Like that the heart ripping kind of works with the page before it with the cape.
Right.
They almost like bleed into each other.
Right. We see a lot of that kind of cross-page design in Spawn comics, and it's nice. Same thing with the torn cape in that one panel on the top. It kind of grows out of the cape on the side. It's that storytelling that continues your eye across the 2 pages. And of course, what would a heart be in Spawn but a big red lump with some weird blue noodles on it?
That's what every heart I've ever seen looks like, or every heart I've ever ripped out.
It's every heart I've ever broken looks like. And that is the lyrics to my new song from Lesbian Angel Tower.
So we move into, Al's after this guy. He's coming after him. And as he's following him, a spindly arm comes out of the ground and grabs his new big boot.
One big boot. Yeah, I like Spawn's cape throughout this. I like that first panel where Spawn is like landing and seeing the heart as the kind of setting the foreground. I like the steam coming up out of the guy's chest and out of the sewer grate. It reminds me of that scene of Wayne's World where he's like, you want to find the guy who wrote it and tear his heart out of his still beating chest so we can see it before he dies.
Maybe that was a Spawn reference.
I think it was a preemptive Spawn reference. Yeah. And then, yes, just as his his hand jutted out of the darkness earlier, Violator's arm bursts out of the sewers with that puff of steam from behind Spawn and grabs one big boot and pulls Spawn down into the sewer. And then we get this very cool page of Spawn kind of hunched over in the sewer with Violator's face filling the rest of the page and kind of very intimidating. Like it's a really cool start to this fight.
Super cool.
I love Greg Capullo's Violator.
I think it's better than Todd's. I'll be honest.
There are things about Todd's that I love, like how weird it is, but he looks more menacing to me than Todd's.
He's scarier. He's scarier because I think he's got a little bit of like size to him and like a little bit of. I like how spindly and weird Todd's is, but I like that, and maybe it's because it's sort of Violator Reborn, right? This is Violator after the Violator mini, where he's gotten a little bit of Spawn's powers. Maybe he's different now, and I think that actually works with changing artists as well, where you just get to go, oh,
same thing with Spawn's costume. They're both evolving. Something Violator notes throughout this fight. One thing I also want to say, I like how far Todd's scripting of Clown/Violator has come. It's way creepier, especially in the beginning and throughout this, and more menacing. He does get in a little yuck shtick, but it's a lot less like, hey, I'm going to walk into his house and fart on his wife, and then I'm going to fucking kill his goldfish and eat his fucking dog. Oh, yuck. It feels less like Andrew Dice Clay as the Joker.
Yeah.
A little more demonic.
It's definitely more intense. It's definitely scarier.
Yes.
And it is a little bit more like trying to position a character as the arch nemesis of another character, which is not what I think Violator comes across as when we first meet him.
You get the impression that he's kind of intended to be, but yes, losing his powers. It's complicated thought process where you get the impression that like Todd maybe wanted fans to be wondering when's he going to come back and get his powers back. It doesn't quite work that way in practice when it's actually told. But I do love this whole fight scene. I love basically that we're getting more of Violator's motivation kind of honed in a little more, where it's like being a general in the armies of hell is a way more desirable position than Violator's bullshit of having to whip Hellspawn into shape.
Yeah, he doesn't really lean into being so that's the thing about Violator that's a little frustrating, is that he wishes he was Spawn rather than being like the Arlie Ermy to Spawn, you know?
Right. And you get that there's a little more characterization here, and there's a little more honing in on that motivation for why he was even doing the things he was doing all the way back in that opening arc, because he wanted to be the one going around killing people and sending them to hell, because he wanted to be the one who gets to have the power and the freedom that a Hellspawn has. Whereas his job...
To this point, he's been better at killing people than Spawn has.
Some of that's going to turn around in these issues, partially because of Violator. But I like the way their relationship is evolving, and I like the way the characterization and the personality of Violator and Clown are evolving. I also love, again, this splash page of Spawn stepping on Violator's chin with one big boot, like stepping in his mouth and yanking his tongue out of his throat. I think it's funny that there's 2 bubbles of Violator dialogue on that page, which, that's sometimes the, vagaries of making comics, is the guy's getting his tongue pulled while he's also technically talking.
Yeah, maybe I should have done that more in the opening, but...
Do not loop that.
I'm going to quadruple it.
Boy, just wait till they show those 2 strange towers again. But but it's a kick-ass drawing. Like, it really rules. And I love Spawn with his mask on here. It's all great. Spawn's chain, hook, and Violator's horn fang on the other page. It's cool. It's
Also,
really good.
I'll say I really love Todd as an inker.
Yeah.
He really blacks out what needs to get blacked out. On the next page, we're really going to see the perfect example of that, which is like the Violator drowning a little bit, or he's like underwater.
We haven't called it out yet, but Orzechowski is nailing these letters. His Violator bubbles are really fun to look at. They also really stand out in a really kick-ass way against Spawn's red cape and everything. The other thing about that red cape is that the coloring on this next sequence when they're in the water works so well for me. Yeah. I love the shades of green and blue that they're using. I love how Spawn's cape stands out in it. I love how the color contributes to the page design.
It also allows Violators like white and gray to sort of stand out as well.
Yes.
Which is really important.
I love that when you look at the 2 pages side by side, you almost get that yin yang of Spawn, the close up of Spawn on the bottom right of the left side page, and then on the upper left side of the panel is Violator. You get that kind of nice page balance.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Greg Capullo's page design is fucking great. It's so good. It makes me want to go back and read some of that Batman again, which is another comic written by a guy who loves his words. God bless him. It makes me want to go back and re-examine that for things that I missed because I just didn't dig it at the time.
I mean, 100%. This fight scene rules. I also, and we've talked about it already before, but I do just love, Greg's mask for Spawn. Yes. I love the that's the thing. The little bits of green, the blacks being backed up all the way, where they're not like overly computer colored, where we're like figuring out light sources that don't exist. It really lends a lot to it, and it still maintains the jaggedy edges to the panels, the sort of obviously the character design of these characters that Todd created. It remains true to all of it while still kind of pushing things forward.
And putting his own kind of muscles behind it, you know?
Yep.
Which Greg Capullo, muscly guy, Greg Capullo.
True.
Big, large man in the arms.
Last page is going to finish out that fight. And
they fall in the sewer. Oh, yeah. So this whole scene is Spawn and Violator fighting in the sewers. Then they have, of course, the big cliche superhero sewer fight moment where they fall over the edge into a big bunch of water.
And Violator seemingly gets away.
Somehow he disappears, and Spawn discovers that his survival is his only priority. He learns that his body, now composed of necroplasm, still needs oxygen, which I think is the funniest thing of all, is that the dead guy still has to breathe. Like, what a bum deal.
Pretty funny considering that Violator had said previously, either in this or in Blood Feud, that he can breathe in air and water.
Yeah.
So I guess different Hellspawn get different powers with regard to that.
So then that's the end of issue 33. Before we get into issue 34, go ahead and hit us with them credits.
So issue 33 was Shadows Part 1. I'm going to remind you. Issue 34 is Ripples. We just changed the name. Don't worry about it.
That happens a lot, though, doesn't it? They'll be like, Conveniences Part 1, and the next one's called, like, Orchard.
Problems.
Yeah.
7. Ripples. So Spawn number 30. Spawn number 34. Credits. Ripples. Story by Todd McFarlane. Art by Greg Capullo, Todd McFarlane. Copy editor and letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color by Steve Oliff, Quinn Suplee, and Oli Optics. Special thanks to Kevin Conrad, Chance Wolfe, and Julius Simmons. Director of Creative Development, Terry Fitzgerald. Graphics Coordinator, Julius Simmons. dedicated to Sal Buscema. This one does not have a long-ass Oleoptics is credit. So
Interesting.
I didn't forget it. It just doesn't exist.
Also, Sal Buscema, very underrated compared to his brother, but I am a huge fan, and I think
Sal's better. Personally,
that's a hot take. But you know what? I support it.
I like his Thor a lot.
Yeah,
big fan of Sal Buscema Thor.
Nothing wrong with that. I was just going to say I love his art myself, and I think he's highly underrated. At the time he was seen as, I don't want to say the lesser because people still dug him, but it was like, well, okay. Couldn't get John. He was sort of the Daniel Baldwin. I don't know. But
I like that one.
But not in terms of quality, because that
Which
guy
Gallagher
sucks.
brother is he like?
Oh God, I don't fucking care. Gallagher feels like he could be a Spawn villain.
I was talking about Oasis, but
I was thinking, see, there's where my goofy ass went, was fucking Gallagher, and then fake Gallagher, his twin brother. You know about that, right? Like
I do.
His twin brother was going around the country as Gallagher, and Gallagher sued him. Gallagher. Yeah, piece of shit, that guy.
They could both be Fleabag brothers, but anyway.
That's what I'm saying, dude. He looks like he is the Vacillator's human form. Like you got Clown / Violator, you got Gallagher / Vacillator. It's wow. I cracked it wide open.
You know what? If Todd gets the rights,
call us. Anyway, here we are. This opening does have Freak. That's the other thing that was a little bit like, okay, Freak does show up here. And he also has some similar qualities to Clown with his hair and his face and even his arms.
And his sort of vibe.
Yeah. His eyes are a little different color. So I'm going to assume, I'm still assuming that was Clown in the beginning of the first issue.
With you. I think it's Clown.
But it's interesting how ambiguous it can be in hindsight.
I think it's fun.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's good.
Cool. And then this Violator, he fell down a weird waterfall within the sewers, as one does, but he gets pulled out by some strange arms. We see a guy in shadow who pulls him out. We do get his face like blocked by a pipe at one point, so it's like, ooh, who's this guy? And
I love the framing of this page with the pipes from the top down, and then
it's great
with Violator's weird arm on the bottom.
Yeah, and we get Violator throwing up, so that's something.
Hork.
And then as Violator kind of comes to, this mysterious character kind of runs away, and he yells at him.
You're lucky I'm not in the mood for casual dismemberment.
I love how big Greg Capullo... So that's the big difference, I think, between Greg and Todd's Violators is. Greg's is a head with some arms.
Yeah, he kind of nails that, like, just a weird gaping maw kind of vibe.
Yeah.
I also like this transformation into Clown on the next page. The colors on this page are great. It's so funny. I like that he just goes, fart! Something's wrong big time.
Now, did he yell fart?
Yes.
Like, it must be that, right?
I think he's saying fart. Something's wrong with Spawn's costume. Because he's mad that Spawn's costume, the K7 Letha, as we learned it is in the previous in Blood Feud, has evolved to the one big boot form with its teeth on the outside, more spikes, more chains, shredded cape. And
apparently it's done that faster than it should have.
Yes, and Clown is lamenting this. The Hellspawn's getting more powerful than Clown wants him to be. But it's nothing he can't handle. And so the other thing is, we're kind of finding out that the reason he actually is engaging Al Simmons in this way is he wants to kill him because he wants to take his place and prove that he's worthy of being a general.
Which we don't even know that he can do, because based on what Malbolgia has said, And based on what we know about K7 Letha has already told us that she is bonded to Elle Simmons. Like, it
also,
is like,
love that she's a lady.
Yeah, me too. But weird that it's so heteronormative. But we don't even know that Clown can do what he wants to do. But it's interesting that that's his motivation now. It's more motivation than he had earlier on in the series. And that's good, I guess. We do get the best rendered Cyan and Wanda that we've had for the entire series on the next page.
I think you're right. Cyan's face, her eyes, though, are kind of different directions. But it's still better than a lot of children's faces that we've seen.
We're doing great compared
Spawn.
to where we've been.
Because Cyan and Wanda are visiting Grandma Blake, and she's telling Grandma Blake, well, you know, Terry transferred to a new department because of the murders. Grandma Blake doesn't even respond.
These folks have a lot to deal with. And I do love Grandma Blake, though.
Oh, what's not to love? Like I've said before, I think I said when we met her before, you know, I was a little grandma's kid. Like every old lady was my grandma, and I got a soft spot for it still. I love this character. Yeah. She's so sweet.
But, you know, that's just a quick check-in. We're going to keep moving forward into a weird part of the plot.
Yeah, I do love the coloring on that page with Wanda, and it makes for a jarring transition to that next page where right at the top panel, Spawn's cape with a bunch of bats.
Awesome.
Second panel, a woman's ass with lips on it.
Awesome panel.
It is, you know, and we've seen similar panels to this before when we had the Redeemer coming into town and getting into New York, and it's a very like Taxi Driver-esque New York. We're well into like Giuliani, like cleaning up Times Square, though.
I think, though, that and it's something that Todd actually mentions in the letters pages. He's like, comic book time is slower than real time.
Yeah.
And I think, so to him, this is still like I think actually in the world of the book,
it's 1993.
Still in like 1992. Like 93, excuse me. So like,
oh no, it might be 92. You're right.
That's what I'm saying. Like the book started in 92, so to him, he's like,
You're right.
Shit has barely moved. Like not a lot of time has passed, and like Giuliani's not been in power for long enough that things are really cleaned up. I will also say that it's a more interesting version of New York to have that be New York.
Sure, it's a lot more interesting to have a woman's ass hanging out outside a porno theater than outside the Disney store, and I think that is just holds true across times and places.
I've always said this.
It's
one of the things I say.
Honestly, people have asked you to stop saying it. Anyway, we're in the like porno district where Spawn is hanging out because he has needs to, and we see this kid getting kind of accosted by this group of, I can only describe them as like cartoons of, they almost look like the punks, the nerds and the geeks from earlier. They're three.
It would have been better if they actually were, though.
Right. They're three white guys selling drugs to this little kid, and they're charging him $600 instead of $300. One of the guys has a swastika tattoo. These are white nationalist gang members, and they're preying on this child. And that's what Spawn thinks as well, because Spawn follows this guy who he considers a pervert hooking kids on drugs into a theater where two women are topless mud wrestling. And I'm going to guess
they're not totally topless. They have mud across the parts that you're not allowed to see on TV. Okay.
But we know it's there. And I mean that you can still kind of, the way it's colored, their nipples are still visible through the mud. And
that's because Greg Capullo's a good artist.
Yeah. And Oleoptics and Quinn Suplee, or whoever it was. My bad if I said it wrong. Great. They are really, I love the happy faces with like the eyes peering out watching
it's really
this.
funny and really weird and disconcerting, so I like it a lot.
I like it, and also honestly, like you said, this is a more interesting version of New York. The sleaze is appealing in some level.
Yeah.
This is where we start to get into like horror movie Spawn in a real way, because Spawn goes into the booth where this guy's drooling over himself, looking like Beavis from, as in and Butthead. And as the women are wrestling, blood starts flying through the hole, the peephole, and covering them along with the mud, and they're freaking out.
The panel of them freaking out is a great panel.
It's lurid. It's a little bit, it's a little bit juvenile, but it's that classic horror movie feel of like something bad is happening in a place for bad people.
Yeah.
Not to say sex workers are bad people, but how it's depicted in this comic is that this is a sleazy den of iniquity.
Yeah. I like it. I don't like what's happening. I like how it's rendered.
I mean, I kind of like what's happening, sort of. Like, I like the horror moviness of it.
I like that this guys get what's coming to him. But...
It's more not even a moral thing. It's just it's a horror movie element of like this feels like a scene from Jason Takes Manhattan or something.
It's not wrong for this guy to be watching these women mud wrestle.
Yeah, no, whatever.
I'm not trying to make a moral judgment on that.
No. But the guy selling drugs to kids or whatever, of course, that's bad.
Well, but, we're actually going to find out that maybe isn't as bad as you think, George.
Right. That is part of the problem that we'll get into. We'll get to some controversial stuff here.
Next page fucking slams.
Yes, the next page slams of Mel Boljo watching Spawn kill this guy and being like, yeah, well, Simmons, you keep saying that you don't want any part in my bullshit, and then you go and you fucking tear this guy up and send him straight to hell to be one of my warriors. It only took
you 30 issues to care about doing what I asked you to do.
And Spawn's done it before, but never like hunted a guy down. In this case, Spawn seemed to have just been hanging out, looking
nearby
for someone to fuck with.
Yeah.
We get the talking heads for the first time in these issues, and since I don't think they were in Blood Feud at all.
They're not. Alan Moore doesn't like him. And that makes me think that he probably hates Frank Miller, but
based. I could see it. So interestingly, what's going on here is they're talking about Bosnia and Serbia and presumably the conflict that was happening in the 90s at the time. I do not have anywhere near enough of a understanding of the actual conflict to get into it. I know there was a civil war. I know there was a dictator. I know there were purgings. It was very bad. I have some good friends who emigrated to the United States as refugees during that conflict. It is very strange that it's being brought up here, seemingly in the context of also criticizing the president, who would have been Bill Clinton at the time, for his handling of this whole thing. It's a sort of weird, kind of very political diversion. I don't think it's meant to be Todd like, this is the issue, I'm taking on politics.
I think it's like that. It's definitely
trying to fill it with, it comes up later, but I think it's trying to fill it with political banter.
I think it is fully, and we talked about this a little bit before we started the episode, it's fully like, I watched the news today on the day I had to write this part of the script.
Yeah.
And this is some of the stuff that was going on. And since I have to ground the book a little bit because I have government like characters, since I have to ground it a little bit in that, then I need to add some of this.
It's him using political, like current political talk as like lorem ipsum almost.
Yeah, it is. I almost wouldn't be surprised if like half of it is like word for word. Like we've talked about trying to parse like politics, like Todd's politics through his work, and I think it's impossible. And
I think we've come to the conclusion, and I think it's correct, that Todd likely sees himself in many ways as apolitical, and the only time he's talking about politics is when he's telling you this is a political opinion. I think that is definitely kind of his... That's going to come back to backfire a lot in this issue as we get into it. what's weird about this whole thing to me is that it's this whole thing about like, okay, there was problems in Bosnia and Serbia. There was also a murder in the red light district, which we saw Spawn commit on the previous pages.
Two things that you wouldn't bring up one after another in
Very
a normal,
strange.
In a normal,
I mean, maybe,
like,
but what's
report.
even weirder is that on E! Entertainment, they're talking about the fucking attack in the porn theater and what could possibly have gone on there. Police are wondering if it's related to the recent vampire case that was closed, which, like, we're at a point in this world where there are vampire cases that are being closed and people are just like, yeah, they closed the vampire case, but excuse me, is this new brutal murder connected to that? On oh my gosh, on E! Entertainment.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I do think that in a weird way, as much as the talking heads are helpful as exposition, I do feel like Todd has written himself into a corner where he doesn't really know what to do with the first gay character in Spawn, in the Spawniverse, where he's like, oh, I don't know what the fuck he's supposed to talk about. What's he supposed to talk about? I also think he doesn't watch E! Entertainment News, which is mostly about like new movies,
red carpets and shit.
Yeah.
Even weirdest is the reactionary guy is like talking about the murder and all this shit, and he's talking about the conflict in Bosnia. This dude is about conspiracies, not a fucking word about the vampires that have now been actively spotted around New York.
Yeah, it's weird. And I think that this is again like where when you get guest writers to try to do some stuff, then you have to spend a page reminding folks who maybe didn't buy Blood Feud that like some shit happened.
Right.
And then you can throw an editor's note in, and there's
but
a bunch
most of what they talk about, that's like a line. Most of what they talk about is Bosnia and Serbia. Yeah. It's strange. It's a strange talking heads.
Yeah.
The next 2 pages is Clown going to Jason Wynn's office and basically telling him, hey, guess what? You don't have a choice in helping me kill Spawn because I know all about him and I know that you want to get rid of him and I want to get rid of him too. So you're going to help me. And basically he says, oh my God. I'm trying to remember exactly what he says. He says, I want you to fuck with Spawn. That's right.
Yeah, basically he's just like, hey, there's a lot of things moving, right? There's a lot of things in play. This guy, Terry Fitzgerald, he's working for you. Be friends with him. Be friends with his family. Be friends with his grandma. Be friends with, or Wanda's grandma. Be friends with all these people. I'll let you know what's going on when I deem it necessary to let you know what's going on, because I know a lot about you and I can ruin your shit.
Yeah, basically help me fuck with Spawn.
Yeah, it's like it's a fine scene, I guess. It puts 2 characters who had nothing to do with each other together, so that's fine. The next
sequence is kind of a famous Spawn sequence. I want to say this is a Spawn issue that I am almost certain that I had as a kid. So many bits of it I recognize so well and I remember so specifically. This bit stands out in my head as like a whole big joke where Sam sees this incredibly beautiful, honestly Mary Jane Watson type beautiful woman walking through the hospital. He tries to address her and stumbles over his words so hard he says breast instead of dress, which imagine being a fucking cop and that's the best you can do. Imagine it and then envision it as reality because that's probably pretty true. Yeah. But he hits on this woman, goes into Twitch's room where Twitch is just throwing darts in a bullseye over and over, nailing the bullseye over and over because he's
in case you forgot, he's a marksman.
He never misses the mark. He slings that thing. And we find that out because Sam walks in saying like, boy, I saw this beautiful woman. Boy, did she have a great pair. And then he sees that that's Twitch's wife, Helen.
I like it. Honestly, I know it's a stupid bit, but I like it.
It's like the Jerry from Parks and Recreation bit.
I mean,
where his wife is a baddie.
They're the most like honeymooners ass characters.
Oh, I think it's funny and it's fine. It's. I also like here where after Sam realizes that he was basically being gross about Twitch's wife, he says, "I'm such an ass," but instead of saying ass, it's like a cartoon braying donkey,
A+,
very Looney Tunes style.
Yeah, I love that.
So they kind of check in with each other. This is kind of the opposite of the last one, where they're really just saying like, yeah, I haven't figured anything out who give the banks the time of day, but I know it's connected to the CIA headquarters. Very slight update. The important thing here is the characterization of Twitch, which I'm at a point with Sam and Twitch where I want more characterization. And even if it's not like the most plot forward interlude, at least it's taking advantage of the characters to have a kind of personal moment that, while it's a gag, it kind of expands on who they are.
It also gives them just a little bit of a personal moment that is specific to them, doesn't relate to the plot, but it lets us know who they are a little bit. It also makes us feel a little bit better about Sam, I think, because Sam, to this point, he kind of rags on Twitch, and then he sort of doesn't really take him seriously most of the time.
Unless he's committing murder or shooting someone.
Yeah, and so it's like, it's weird. And it's a dumb reason for him to like have respect for his partner. Right? But it is a realistic one in a weird, unfortunate way. Where like, dudes do respect the guy that can get the girl on some level. I don't know. It's stupid. But
it is, but it's still fun.
It works and it's fun.
And, I also like that Sam, with his many snacks here, he's eating Yum, he's eating Yo-Yos, and then he's eating Hoo-Ha's. We get another page here where we cut back to Clown and Jason Wynn. Jason gets a call from the president telling him congratulations on handling the Bosnia situation. And Jason Wynn is confused. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Meanwhile, is he getting a second call here?
Yeah, he gets a second call immediately. So
that's right.
He like gets off the phone. He starts thinking like, what mission? I didn't sanction any. And while he's thinking about it, he gets another call. And he says, I take it. And Clown says, I take it you've heard from your pal. Well, consider it a little preview of things to come, a down payment, if you will. Clown kind of insinuating that he's going to be able to take care of things for Jason Wynn if Jason Wynn plays his cards right.
But the whole thing with the president is very weird. It seems, I know it's probably going to come up more. And
I think it's just to up the ante a little bit. It's just to make it seem like crazier, but it does seem weird.
So then we get this little check-in again. Spawn's back in his alley. He's literally got blood on his hands from shredding that guy in the porno theater. And Cagliostro shows up, stroking his little cat, which I love. I mean, gotta love the little cat. The panel on the top right of the second page of this sequence, the cat just looks so happy.
Cagliostro really holding a cat like he's never held a cat in the first panel, though.
Yeah. So here's the thing about this. There's this weird little diversion where Spawn is supposed to learn yet another lesson about fucking with people and killing them, which is that when you do this, you can't ever be morally right. There's no right way to enact vigilante justice, because not only are you serving Malbolgia, you fucked it up, because the evil drug dealer the white supremacist drug dealer who is preying on children was actually just selling drugs to that little kid, not because he's got the kid hooked on drugs, but because that kid is an even worse and more violent drug dealer who's been an evil drug dealer since he was a little kid. And he's been involved in murders that he's gotten away with just by being a kid. And it's this whole like, yeah, you thought the black kid was being victimized, but it's actually the white supremacists who are being victimized there. And now you victimize them too. See how bad that is, Spawn? And it's this weird gotcha from Cagliostro that I kind of hate.
I think it's bad. I think it's also just like a bit of bad writing, where I think what really Cagliostro is trying to get across, and I think what Todd's trying to get across, is that if you're not looking at the full picture, you're not understanding really who's at fault. I think Cagliostro, there should be a line where he's like, "Hey, you weren't wrong to kill that guy,
or whatever."
But but you didn't solve the problem, and I think that that's what the point of it is.
That is the point, and I also think, but what is really weird about it to me, and what stands out the most, is we've just had all this shit about Bosnia and Serbia and other current events, Clinton administration shit. This is basically Cagliostro saying, yeah, you locked up the white guy, but you left the black super predator on the street, which was really the line that was being sold as like the law and order president, like Bill Clinton and especially Hillary Clinton in the early to mid 90s. That's how he was getting elected, was running on this platform that young children in urban centers, young black children, were being raised as super predators with no morals who would kill and do anything. Now, I don't think Todd is trying to say, I think that, but he's not trying not to say that. And I think that's the failing so many times when Spawn, quote unquote, gets political, is that it's inadvertent and it's really just people catching strays off Todd McFarlane not considering or even maybe understanding the political ramifications of what he's writing. And much like the confusion of hindsight with some of those plot points, this looks really bad in hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 100% a guy watching the news that night and putting it into the book that he wrote that night. And it's unfortunate, and it's not an excuse. But it's a guy not interrogating further, like what he's writing, especially with a like, maybe we'll get to talk to him about this one day. But it's just like his main character's black, so yeah, he saves the black kid. I think that he kind of like puts it there, right? He like stops it there. It's a child. He's the same race as the hero, and maybe that's all there is.
Yeah, I don't think it's Todd trying to take a stand on any of this shit. I think it's like you said, Todd drawing from what he's hearing in current events and stuff, but just it feels weirdly ham-handed, and also, again, in retrospect, super not chill. Like
this is where I think that Todd overall is getting better as a storyteller. However, he's like not a great writer, if that makes sense.
This is really the problem that comics had, mainstream superhero comics have had, still have, since, even the 60s, where whenever they address these real world things or they use these real world ideas, they pick them up and put them down like props and like things that don't have any deeper meaning or real world ramifications. Because a lot of the times the writers aren't thinking, I'm going to make this Spawn comic a commentary on the idea of super predators. But a lot of them are thinking, I'm going to draw from this story that I heard, or I'm going to come up with this idea of like, oh, what if there was a kid who was even worse? And not thinking about like where that comes from or what that really means. You just see it so much. The way that non-white characters were written for so many years in comics by white people as just silly stereotypes. Exactly.
There's no nuance. There's not a lot. There's just none.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because we even see it with the writers that we consider, diversity icons, right? Our Chris Claremonts, our Marv Wolfmans, where we're like, look at what they did. And then when you really look at what they did, it's still not better.
A lot of it is still just stereotypes. They're just using them in ways that are meant to employ a sort of, they're not meant to be punching down as much. Or right. Maybe that's not even the right way to say it. Maybe it's more that they're using them slightly more thoughtfully, but they're still using the stereotypes.
Yeah. Without being outright about it, but they are still using them in some way.
So Spawn's like, well, what the fuck do you want from me, dude?
And I kind of like that Spawn is getting to the point where he's pushing back against other characters that are calling him out. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't doing what Melbolgia wanted him to do, and he got called out about that, and a bunch of shit happened. Now he's kind of doing what Melbolgia wanted him to do. Now Cagliostro's on his ass. Like, he's
And
like, what
this-
am I supposed to do?
Well, and this, where Cagliostro says to him, kind of mirrors back to the first conversation he had with Bobby, where Bobby was like, look, man, fuck off or don't, but don't make it about us. It's about you and these connections. You know, it's about your responsibilities. Cagliostro basically says the same thing, says to him, these are your problems. You know, I know these things aren't turning out how you want, but it is your problem. Because like it or not, there's a host of others tangled in your web. Ignoring them would weave a life without purpose. Your friends, your loved ones would fall prey to much evil. And that's kind of, we're getting that, you know, earlier we had Clown show up with Jason Wynn and basically be like, start bugging these people, start, you know, bringing these people closer. And when I tell you the reason, you'll understand. And therefore, and there too, rather, in the next little page, the last little sequence at the end of the issue, we get Terry Fitzgerald in his new office at the CIA headquarters in New York City, I guess.
Which is weird.
Yeah, CIA headquarters. He's going through files. What else in the world could there be but files? And now, as much
Which
as
he
I
kind of
like,
says, actually, even.
I know. I as much as I like the character and the way Terry is drawn here, having the papers all just flying out and the files on the ground and everything,
very weird.
Especially because it seems that he is looking for files that he shouldn't have access to. And you can tell by the nervous look on his face and the beads of sweat on his forehead as Jason Wynn comes into the room and basically says, look, I know you've been working yourself to the bone. I'm already hearing that you're one of the hardest workers in the office, but what I need something else from you. Someone in this organization has been pursuing non-sanctioned activities while at the same time constructing a paper trail pointed in my direction.
Dum, dum, dum.
Basically kind of drawing Terry into an investigation about himself. It's very much the guy who was Deep Throat being the guy investigating Deep Throat, which was not known at this time, I don't think.
It's fine.
But yeah, it's fine. It's more of their little game of cat and mouse, their psychological drama. And it ends the issue on a weird spot. Because, you know, Jason Wynn says, something tells me I can trust you more than others right now. And you get that that's part of him, like, prodding him, part of what Clown said. The stuff with Jason Wynn and Clown and Terry Fitzgerald, that little triangle, is the weakest stuff. Inadvertent racist tropes aside, that's the weakest storytelling to me because it kind of just feels like mashing the parts together. It doesn't feel like there's really a strong reason for Jason Wynn and Clown to just be like, hey, by the way, we're working together.
Yeah, it's based on the letters columns over this time, like over these 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
And also toy sales.
Yeah.
Have been a thing. Violator has to come back.
Yeah.
And I think that Todd
He's also going to be in the movie.
And Todd recognizes, though, like, well, if I bring him back, he has to be significant in some way. Because we've talked about the fact that Spawn does not really have, like, a rogues gallery that is anything to write home about.
It's growing now.
As much as this arc wants to kind of remind us that that's not the case, he has one fight with Violator. Who cares about it? He does bring him back to life / give him his powers. Fine. Chapel, he burns his face off or whatever. That's going to end up not really mattering. Vito Gravano, who gives a shit? He's a mob guy. The Curse.
He's barely been in the comic, to be honest.
The Curse, he fucking destroyed that guy, so who gives a shit about that guy? And also, Sansker fucking ripped his arm off too. He defeats Sansker, so like that doesn't really fucking matter. Spawn is so powerful that he just kind of like gets through these guys.
He's the Roman Reigns. He's just no one can beat him.
So,
except for a young man with a neck tattoo.
So, we're in a tough place. You're in a tough place as a writer when you need to create that overarching conspiracy, right? You need that kingpin. You need that sort of like Norman Osborn, but the version of it that you have is kind of nothing. Like Jason Wynn's kind of nothing. He's in control of the government, but the government, there's no like government
We don't
assassin.
see him do anything other than the thing we heard he did at one point.
Overt kill or the curse would be much more effective as like a government assassin. Then we know that they're a thing that he's sending at Al, right? But he doesn't even know who Al is at this point. It's taken us years to even get to him maybe finding out. So I'm not complaining that the book is moving slowly. I'm complaining more that the
moves aren't making that much sense.
Yeah, the moves are almost moves for the sake of moves, and they're not moves for the sake of like moving plot forward, doing anything significant. I am a little sad that Wanda is getting sidelined again after we got like an arc and a half where it felt like she was going to be helping Terry with more stuff.
Not least for the reason that there are just not many women in the Spawn comics that say or do anything.
Exactly, that are not also maybe angels or whatever, but also Terry is a fucking dumbass, and his move should have been, oh, we're going to get you to work for Jason Wynn.
Something like that, yeah.
Like something else, anything else. Because the other thing, too, is how does Jason Wynn not realize that this fucking guy is married to the guy he got killed's wife? There's like
maybe he does. I don't know. Who knows?
He doesn't seem to know.
Yeah, and that's it's a lot of scraps of plot that are just thrown in there that are not really kind of feeling like they're coming from one cloth to me. But
Agreed.
There's time still to pull it together, and these issues do a lot to move certain plot lines forward.
Agreed, but we'll see.
Yeah. Overall, though, what did you think, Pierce? What are your thoughts on these issues?
I had a good time. These are issues that, like, if I was reading them month to month and I'm a little bit forgetting some of the stuff going on, I'm probably pretty forgiving to them. I'm probably like, oh, it's a 7 out of 10. In reading them back to back, especially in the context of the show, I'm like, it's a 4 or 5 out of 10. They're not my favorite issues in the world.
I think there are parts of them that work really well.
Yeah.
I like the return of Violator and Clown. I like where he's at now as a villain. He seems a little more interesting.
I kind of wish he got powered up. I think that's what I wanted is I wanted him to come back and be more of a match for Al. And instead, we got Al powered up and we got Violator just sort of being like,
well, I guess I'll have to deal with that.
Ah, shit.
Yeah.
I like the tease of the Freak.
The tease of the Freak.
It's my new metal band.
Hell yeah.
Is our first single. But yeah, there's. I think I think we both read Blood Feud right before we read this.
And Blood Feud works a little better. It feels a little more fully formed than just 2 random issues of Spawn. Also, that's comparing Alan Moore.
Yeah.
One of the great comic writers of all time to one of the great comic creators of all time. I'll give that to Todd. But his writing has just never been at the level of Alan Moore. And it probably won't ever be.
Extremely
true.
Have to
be. It also doesn't have to be.
No, I do think that we're a little less forgiving when he's not drawing, though. When he's when he's writing and drawing, I'm a little bit more forgiving, I think, on everything because I'm understanding, like, all right, there's a lot going on here. I understand that you got to throw a big splash page up to get through a lot of exposition.
At the same time, though... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
The fact that we're getting the next arc is just called Setup.
That's not encouraging, considering what most of these issues are, is like set up for something.
Yeah.
And you just kind of want more payoff. I loved the Spawn Violator fight in the sewer.
Yeah, it's great.
That was a whole great sequence.
I give it all to Greg Capullo, though. I mean, I didn't even call it out when we went through it, but the page where the water is coming down Al's face.
Oh, I loved that too.
It's so sick. So sick. Yeah. So sick. Maybe the best panel in the whole book. Like, best individual panel that's not a splash page, you know? So, anyway. Overall, it's fine.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page about this. I maybe liked it a little more than you in some places, but then I was there are parts of it that made me feel very like, okay, we're doing this again. Like just the 90s, the baseline racism of 90s comics.
Yeah.
That happens to be there.
It's there. And it's I don't know. It's one of those things that you have to call out when you see it. You have to understand that it is a little bit of a product of its time. That I think that I don't think it was meant maliciously, because I think it is trying to tell part of a story.
But I don't think it was handled with care.
I agree. It's like Kitty Pryde using the N-word, where you're like, woof. I get where you're going with this, but you didn't do it in a way that was effective, that was nuanced, that was kind, that was
the handling didn't justify the subject matter.
Agreed. So
that's is what it is with 90s comics, and that's why we talk about them in this way. So yeah, I think we're on the same page about that. Was there anything in the letters columns?
Nothing really exciting. It's mostly a lot of 13 to 17-year-olds writing in.
You know why? Because as we in the letters columns, you may remember from Blood Feud, there's someone who says like, you got a letter from a 13-year-old boy from Temecula, Wisconsin, or whatever the fuck, that said he didn't like Spawn anymore. And then you said way back when that if a 13-year-old from wherever the fuck, Bumbleshit, New Jersey, didn't like Spawn anymore, you were going to have a serious conversation with yourself. So how did the conversation go, Mr. McFarlane? And he was like, yeah, man, I printed the one letter from the kid, but like, I don't have time to cater my book to every single individual person. So now he's printing all the letters from 13-year-olds that still love Spawn.
I will say most of them do still really like him. There is one interesting one in issue, I believe it's 33. Yeah, in 33, that says, Mr. McFarlane, first of all, you should know I'm a Southern black woman. The first time I bought an issue of Spawn, number 4, was because a friend of mine said he was a black, quote, super guy. As you know, they aren't exactly a dime a dozen. I was really impressed with the complexity of Spawn's plight and how well it worked with the art. The overall effect had me swooning. I was disappointed that African American culture had nothing to do with the plot, and that when he turns human, he is white, but I figured you can't have it all. Then there was Wanda. I had prepared myself for a weepy housewife with no life outside her husband, but I was pleasantly surprised. She was a strong black female character who even kept her last name when she was married. So what? I've seen her, twice without her breasts exploding out of her shirt onto the page.
Based letter.
But I thought, well, that's just part of the comic business. When she and Cyan turned white for issue 10, however, I was annoyed. All of the old characters looked exactly the same except for Wanda and Cyan. I completely understand artistic endeavors, but if a white character's main squeeze turned black for an issue for no apparent reason, it would be more than a little odd. Later on, I thought it was cool that she wanted to help her husband, Terry, find out what all the confusion was about. I was loving it. After I read issue 28, however, I was completely over Wanda Blake. The Wanda that was once intelligent goes to New York City, 1, at night, 2, alone, 3, into an alley, 4, wearing a very nice trench, a mini skirt, and matching pumps, 5, flinching at every sound. Then she literally runs away weeping. Now, just one of those would have been okay, but all of them together, there's a thin line between brave and stupid. and she and her sheltered upbringing took a flying leap on over to the stupid set. Then it got worse. Never mind that I've never seen the Klan until I moved up north. I know the KKK and the South are practically symbolic of each other because of history. My real gripe is about Spawn. The only time that he, as a black man in a society where racial harmony is just a TV ad, ever comes into the plot, he starts on about the man like a whining rap artist. No, not all of them. He blames all of his employment problems on the fact that he is black. It was the everyone's a racist and they're all out to get me song and dance. I can't begin to tell you how disappointed I am, but I'm hanging in there because I know it's going to get better. Besides, even at your worst, you guys are better than most. Annoyed, but still a faithful reader and fan, Antoinette Reynolds, Jasper, Alabama.
From Jasper, Alabama.
Yeah.
Where they were in. Wow. Well, you know, I don't know if I've ever been to Jasper, Alabama, but I've seen a lot of Klan in the fucking South. Anyway, one thing I want to say about that I really liked is that, boy, really saying exactly what we've been talking about with Wanda is just that really being let down started out as so interesting. Something that we didn't really talk about it, I don't think, in the episode with number 10, which is the Dave Sim.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually meant to be Wanda and Cyan Todd's wife and daughter.
Yeah, the actual Wanda and
Cyan. Yes, which is why they're white in that issue.
I think that we mentioned it. I don't remember at this point. I haven't re-listened to on today. As of today, I don't remember. But Todd does call that out in his response where he says, "Hey, you're slightly mistaken on that one. You're not wrong. However, you misunderstood what we were going for.
And if you didn't know that was Todd's wife and daughter."
Exactly. And that's what he was saying. He's like, hey, if I can't name characters after my own family, what can I do? And so he's like, hey, my family is white and I named them after my family. And so in this allegorical tale, that's my family, not Al's.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
And, you know, she's also not wrong for calling out the fact that the only time that Todd McFarlane really engages with Al Simmons' race is when it's something that is being used in a weird parable like that. That's not to say I think that a white guy needs to be digging into the racial identity politics and like the you know, trying to portray an authentic portrayal of, you know, their experience or something. But I think that I don't think that white writers need to be trying to embody black voices over black people and trying to say, I am the person to claim these black narratives. However, I do think that sometimes when you have a black hero, as this letter points out, it starts to feel irresponsible to only engage with it in terms of those kind of violent racist parables.
Yeah, and I think that some of what Todd says back is understandable. I do think that he is... I don't think that there's like a mean bone in this man's body when it comes to the art that he makes and how people perceive it. I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm sure he's gotten in fights with people about it, but in the way that he interacts with the folks that send letters in, and I think in the way that he interacts with people who say they are fans, you know, here he says, the final point about Spawn's attitude towards the white man is that he still has a lot of anger built up over his death and subsequent resurrection and hasn't had much of a chance to vent it. Because he hasn't talked to the bums about his past life that much doesn't mean he doesn't harbor some very strong convictions. I think that he's making an excuse there, but I think he's at least acknowledging that was part of the letter, and he made the point to print the letter.
Yeah.
And I think that he understands that, yes, that's an aspect of this character that I need to at least visit at some point. And I don't know that the machinations of the plot that I've created have allowed an opening for that to happen.
I will give Todd McFarlane absolute credit for the fact that even when he sometimes gets it wrong, that KKK issue is kind of shocking. We talked about it at the time. It had some real issues, and the thing, the speech that she's talking about basically spawned weirdly railing against fucking uh, affirmative action.
Yeah.
Even when he gets it wrong, he listens to the voices of people saying, "Hey, you got this wrong." And like you said, he printed her letter, and I haven't, of course, read his full response, but it doesn't sound like he said, "Hey, you're wrong about all this shit. Fuck you." It sounds like he said, "This is where I was coming from."
Yeah.
And that's,
I think
maybe a more admirable dialogue. At least it's something of him saying, like, "I'm listening to you."
I think he's somebody that, and it's weird. I think as we do this show more and more, I'm like defensive of him. Like, I know it sounds very silly, but I want to believe the best, and I want to, in our readings of this, I do give him the benefit of the doubt. But the fact is that we're two white people doing that for a character that is black, maybe defending a white creator who, while he might have the best intentions, is still wrong.
Right.
And, I don't know. Maybe we deserve to get called out too. So
maybe so. I mean, I'm not going to claim any authority in talking about
absolutely not.
when these issues of like the weird racism and stuff crop up. I'm not speaking from a point of moral authority. I'm speaking from a point of, like, to me, to be anti-racist means calling out racism when you see it, and I am not immune to stumbling over that. You'll notice I sometimes try and stop and measure myself and everything.
Sure.
And I think that, yeah, I made my point. I don't know. Edit that shit. Whatever. You got it.
Yeah. All right. Well, final thoughts on these two.
I think we summed it up already.
Which are Shadows Part 1. And then
Ripples.
Shadows maybe never getting a Part 2.
No.
As far as we know.
I think we summed it up. They're kind of like just issues of Spawn. And that's kind of the era of Spawn that we're getting into, is there's less issues where it's like, here's this thing that has this fabled story attached to it, and more just, these are just some issues of Spawn now. And, there's something to be said for getting into that and seeing, especially compared to what's been established about Spawn and in 30-something issues, what Todd McFarlane sees as the value in the character and in his world.
Yeah, agreed. I had kind of a good time with these issues.
I
like to see Violator again. I like to see the tease of a new other character happen in the background. There's a little bit more of an understanding of like an A and a B plot.
Right.
Or an A, B, and a C plot, kind of.
We're seeing the storytelling evolve, that's for sure.
And that's fun. I think it's approaching something that I think for you and I, once we became professionals, looks more like what modern comics look like. It's not perfect. It probably won't ever be. But
no, but what other comics are? Not many.
None, and none have lasted this long underneath one man's pen on a certain level.
That's true.
Even though that'll even change, but he guides them in some way. So anyway, had a good time.
Well, I think that sums it up,
Yeah. Our next episode after this one will be Setup Part 1 and 2. Which those are actually called Setup Part 1 and 2.
Finally we'll be getting into the setup part of Spawn.
As opposed to this one, which was Shadows Part 1 and then just Ripples. No parts. Maybe we'll ever read Shadows Part 2. That's the thing. I want to only write Shadows Part 2. I don't want to.
What if that's 78 issues from now, like Spawn 106, Shadows Part 2?
Would be hilarious.
Yeah. Well, I think we've come to that time. You can find me, George Marston, my writing on Newsarama every ringin' dingin' dongin' day. And you can find my social media at Crypt Trash on Instagram once in a while and Blue Sky. You can hear my band's music, Hypersleep, hypersleep.bandcamp.com. We're also on Spotify and all the apps. You can hear my solo music on YouTube at Witch Crisis. And that's pretty much it. Pierce, where can our friends find you?
You can find me generally at PE Lightning or at lapsed.punk. You can listen to my band, Power Trash. We're going on
Hell
tour.
yeah.
We're actually, by the time this comes out, we will not be on tour anymore. We'll be done. So I'm not even going to mention that. I'm going to cut that out now. But also, you can listen to George and I's band, Archaeopteryx.
Oh yeah, we do have an EP that we recorded on, I think, like a USB microphone or something.
Like a year, like what, like 4 years ago?
Longer than that, my friend. It was like 7 years ago.
Was it really that long? I hope not.
I think so.
I hope
anyway,
if
time
you like,
flies.
If you like shittily recorded,
let's call it lo-fi. If you like lo-fi hardcore.
If you like lo-fi hardcore screamo, then we had a great time.
We did.
Maybe you will too. You can find my writing on Newsarama, on Popverse, on other places, maybe, but probably mostly randomly on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever. You can follow Spawnography at SpawnographyPod on Twitter, at Spawnography on Blue Sky, as well as Instagram. And you can send us an email at spawnographypod@gmail.com. Please rate, review, subscribe on whatever podcatcher you use, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., etc., etc. We really appreciate it. It helps the show. Tell other Spawn fans about it. Tell people that maybe don't like Spawn and just like comics, or maybe just like us.
Yeah, there's a lot to love here. So we love it when you send us messages and you respond to our comments and stuff. We love to hear from you. So don't be afraid and don't be shy. And until next time, Pierce, for Todd so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn. Later.
Spawn!